let's hit running backs in our pick 100 to 150 range. You know, we use the word sleeper here a little bit loosely, but for the purposes of this pod stream, whatever you want to call it, that's what we're doing. But let's go in with Antonio Gibson, the Wolves' 100 to 150 running back pick.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like cheating because I just checked Fantasy Pros this morning and he went from 101 to 97. So I guess I've crossed the 100 pick threshold.
Invalid.
Running back 35. I know, I'm such a cheater. It sucks. He is going after pick 100 on underdog still, though. And he's been the running back 14, 8, and 28 his past 3 seasons in the NFL, his only 3 seasons in the NFL. And he's going as running back 33 and 35. I think he's going to be used better than ever, though, this year. Yes, it's going to be more of a timeshare than we're used to, especially compared to that running back 8 season when he was borderline bell cow status. But that might not be a bad thing for Antonio Gibson, a traditional college wide receiver that got transitioned to running back for whatever reason and then never used as a pass catcher. In fact, McKissick was the one taking all the passing volume. 5, 4.8, and 6.8 targets per game the last 3 years for J.D. McKissick. That includes a 110 target season in his last full 16-game slate for McKissick. He's gone, and they've already talked about how that role is going to Antonio Gibson under the mind of Eric Bieniemy, who used Jerick McKinnon to perfection throughout his career so far with the Chiefs. 512 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns on 71 targets for McKinnon last year. He had the most fantasy points per touch, and I don't think anybody's sitting here thinking McKinnon is this world breaker that deserves the most points per touch. That was more scheme-based than him himself, in my opinion, and I think that's going to be great. We already saw Gibson catch that easy red zone touchdown on his second preseason week. So you give me a more explosive McKinnon in a better role with already a great touchdown score. Sure, Robinson can do all that early down grinding, and he'll probably catch a handful of balls too. He had 4 catches on a half of action on preseason week 2. That's just a staple, though, of the enemy's offense is all the running backs getting involved in the pass game. So I am very excited for a historically well-known touchdown scorer, explosive athlete, finally getting out into space, finally being used the right way under a bright new mind, and especially with Howell looking as good as he does, even more touchdown chances then. I love Antonio Gibson at his price tag and have been gobbling up as my running back 3 or 4 in these drafts.
Now, Wolf, you've tried to slide in multiple other guys here, according to the agenda. You've even got a banner made up for an honorable mention guy. So let's not kick it to Mike yet. You've still got a lot on your mind.
I'll get my honorable mention. One of my honorable mentions, Mike's taken anyways, so love it. I love. We're often aligned, me and Mo. Really, unless it's Kyle Pitts, that we're otherwise and really good alignment there. Jaylen Warren, though, another guy I wanted to toss out there. Mike already highlighted how many more touchdown opportunities there could have been for this Steelers offense. So they want them just taking another step. Pickett in the preseason 9 for 11. I mean, he's been looking great. So this offense taking another step forward. I'm with Mike on that in his quarterback call with Pickett. And Warren, yes, he's already behind. He's going to be behind Najee. The coach, Matt Canada, despite Warren's impressive preseason, has said this is still Najee's backfield. I understand that. But Warren all last year, more efficient, more effective than Najee. Yes, Najee was hurt, but even still, he wasn't overly efficient as a rookie as well. Jaylen Warren, meanwhile, one of the most efficient backs in the leagues. He rips a 62-yard touchdown off. Everybody sees that. His price goes up around, and I'm still enjoying it because I think he'll be on the field more often. He was already a bit of a third down back. He's so far this preseason been mixing in on the early downs even more often. So 30%, 40% of the touches, that's not typical for a Tomlin backfield, but maybe Warren will get some benefits and beyond just a pure handcuff. But as a pure handcuff, the Steelers backfield is always one to target, whether it's Le'Veon Bell, D'Angelo Williams behind him, James Conner goes down, the next guy up. They always get fed whoever it is. Tomlin himself says, I'm a bell cow guy. I'm a workhorse guy. It's how I like to craft my backfields. And he backs that up. Whenever he's had a clear-cut starter, 24 opportunities per game for his backs. They've averaged around 22 fantasy points per game. Again, that's includes backup D'Angelo Williams that year. So if something does happen to Najee, you're talking about a league winner in Jaylen Warren. And even if not, I think he's a guy that you could potentially toss in your flex in the right matchups where you think he could get some things going on the ground because he is so explosive. He is going to be involved regardless. But as that handcuff upside, he would literally swing leagues if anything happens to Najee. So I love Jaylen Warren as 120 or so price tag right now.
Worthy of honorable mention. Good sell there. All right, kicking it to Mike for his first running back sleeper in the 100 to 150 range. Go ahead.
Yeah, first I just want to say that if you hadn't already taken him, Gibson would have been my call here. I really like him as well. I think he's a great price, especially with currently going as a fringe RB3, RB4. I think he's solid. But we're here to talk about Perine, former Bengal, so I'm attached to him a little bit. But the first thing I wanted to hit with him is just the surrounding situation. First, Sean Payton plucks him out of Cincinnati. He's his first. Perine is the running back free agent that he wants to sign, and Perine turned down similar money in Cincinnati to go play with Sean Payton in Denver. So that doesn't really mean all that much, but I think it's worth noting. And second is the Javonte Williams situation. That's the other big factor playing into how you should be drafting Perine. He's coming off of an ACL and an LCL repair. I think at this point it's around the 10-month mark, maybe coming up on 11. I believe it was in October of last year. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. I believe J.K. Dobbins came off something similar or almost the exact same last year, and we saw him not looking right even down the stretch last year in week 10 and 11. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to be the same player that he was. I think we could certainly see some signs of rust, and even Sean Payton holding him back, which does nothing but benefit Perine. If Javonte Williams isn't playing and Perine is basically the only option at running back there, I think he's an insane value, especially where he's going right now in the beginning of the 10th round. But even if Williams is healthy and playing a significant role in this offense, I think Perine still pays off. He's going as the running back 38, but I think he'll see enough volume to significantly beat that ADP. His last 6 years in New Orleans, Sean Payton's running back 2, he averaged 11 touches per game. During his time in Cincinnati, Perine averaged 18.2 PPR points per game in games where he saw at least 10 touches. So when he's getting the ball in his hands, he's being productive with it. And we know, at least in Cincinnati, for the most part, those touches were passes. I think that will be the same in Denver, which we know those are the high value touches. And I think if he's getting in that 10 to 12 touches a game, that range, I think he's going to pay off significantly when he's going near the RB.
Yeah, I think
he got cut off there, but did he say 18.2 fantasy points a game when the guy got 10 touches or more?
Absolutely, yeah. And I wanted to address that. I think it's a really good point, and I'll build off Mike. It looks like he's regaining it right here. The backfield under Sean Payton has always been, just to illustrate his point even further, a routine top 3 in expected fantasy points per backfield, largely because they have, and if you want to add him, I can click Mike. It looks like he's back here. They routinely peppered the running back position, always under Sean Payton. There's only one season they weren't top 5 in running back target share under Sean Payton. When they had a guy like Kamara, Reggie Bush, Darren Sproles, they were routinely at 28 to 33% target shares as well, which is why they always leave that. And that's what Perine does best, pass catching, and especially as a pass protector, a guy that can just really be in there on all 3 downs. And we've seen that with Payton as well, is his number 2 running backs, obviously not quite as valuable as the number 1 guy, but if the one misses time, whether it was Ingram behind Kamara, whether it was Latavius Murray, had multiple 30-point days when he took over that Ingram role just a couple seasons ago, they routinely, the number 2 backs, if they get thrust into starter's duty, it's usually a committee, and then when somebody has to take over a bell cow role, they become legitimate league winners. And we even saw Perine do that already himself last year when he was filling in for Joe Mixon. And that's probably why he has that, anytime over 10, he averages 11, over 18 fantasy points per game. That does make sense because when he was a starter last year, he was absolutely dominant. Samaje Perine was going for 30, 19, and 24 fantasy points across his 3 starts. So we know he can get it done as a starter every down back. We know he'll have a role either way, 11 touches averages for his backup. I think it's a great call, and his price is going down with all the healthy reports on Javonte, which makes sense. It's understandable. He was going around pick 90 early in the offseason. Now he's going at 120 to even further. I think Samaje Perine's definitely similar to, even better than Jaylen Warren in that sense of a handcuff with great benefits as well. I think it's a great call, Mike. And you had an honorable mention I really like on here too.
I wanted to say something about Mike's honorable mention because I don't know if I'm misquoting or not. My memory's not what it used to be. But I was talking to a buddy of mine after we recorded on Monday, and I'd asked Mike if he was nervous about Dolphins because of Tua and the fact that I could see him getting carted off week 2 or something. And he just kind of very boldly said, I don't draft scared. And then he kind of threw an asterisk on there and said, except maybe with Rashaad Penny. Was that the guy? Was that the guy?
Yeah, it was Rashaad Penny because
okay.
I don't weigh in re-injury like that much, but when it comes to Penny, I will listen to it because it has been, I think, five years in the NFL. He hasn't played a full season. I really like Penny. I mean, everything he has done while he's been healthy from a statistical standpoint, his breakaway run rate, he's an explosive runner, had been through the roof. His yards per carry has been among the league's best. But I mean, first, the problem is he might not stay healthy. That's been a consistent problem throughout his year. And now that we're hearing all this stuff about Kenneth Gainwell being ahead of him, Penny maybe even getting cut, that's what made me – he would have made – last week, Penny definitely would have been my option here. But I'm starting to get a little bit more hesitant with the things that have been coming out about this Eagles backfield in the last couple of weeks, or maybe the last week or so. But I think he's still he's a talented enough player with a price that you can justify taking him still. So I'm not out on Penny just yet, but I'm definitely monitoring that situation pretty closely.
Yeah, I think he's a good one to bring up, though, just in the sense that I want an Eagles running back, no matter which one it ends up being. I prefer Swift. He's definitely the most expensive as well, so that makes sense. But at 80 to 90, I like Swift's price tag. But if I miss on him, whether it's Penny or Gainwell, to me, I've honestly been playing whoever's going cheaper. And right now, Penny's been going from, pick 100 early to now 140. He's fallen about 40 spots. And now that becomes the guy I'm often taking here. Because, maybe Gainwell is the more reliable guy, and he starts the year off as the lead touchback, potentially. I don't even know if I buy that necessarily, but that's the report that's been coming out here. But Penny, all he has to do, unless he gets cut, then it's, well, that sucks. But as long as he's on this team, and that's what I expect, I think he's really going to have a role. He's definitely the most explosive runner here. Just 2 seasons ago, he was the number 1 running back in the fantasy playoffs. He was the guy you had to have if you wanted to win your league, win best ball tournaments, was Rashaad Penny, and that was on the Seahawks. You put him behind this Eagles offensive line. That's why I want any of these backs. Is that line is the best in the league at everything. Pass protection, run blocking. I absolutely love anybody playing in that offense, especially running backs, because he's going to have the most wide open lanes he's ever seen. And Penny is one of the most explosive runners by whatever metric you want. Breakaway, run rate, broken tackles per force per touch. Anything you want to look at, he's always among the top 5. It's just a matter of he's not on the field for long enough for it to truly rack up the stats that would make him a superstar. But when he's out there, when he's playing, Penny has looked phenomenal. And I expect there will be at least a small stretch this season, maybe hopefully for your fantasy playoffs, where he is just a league winner, very capable of putting up 20, even 30-point days. And now within this offense, I love it. I know all the negative buzz is about Penny right now, and I'm just gobbling him up the later he falls. Was one of my highest owned running backs, so maybe it's a little owner bias in these early best ball drafts, was slamming him when he was like 110, 120, and then he got up to 90s, and now he's all the way at 140, so I'm all the way back in, hitting Penny as much as I can. I think it's a great call.
All right, let's get a little bit deeper into the draft, and let's hit you with an actual late guy, 160 to 200 range. Go ahead, Wolf.
Yeah, and he's going to be climbing up in best ball drafts. That's Tyjae Spears. I got him in the last round of my home league. So ideally a guy that's still sitting out for you guys in home league drafts. Definitely be prepared to reach on Tyjae Spears if you want him in your best ball drafts. And I think you should be taking him in any format at this point. I am in love with him. He was the standout of camp, according to all beat writers. He was one of the most active players. Afterwards, the offensive coordinator, Tim Kelly, says, we're going to give Spears as much as he can handle. And I don't necessarily buy that when you're playing behind Derrick Henry. How much is going to be left for the taking? Probably not much. But this is more of one of those handcuff plays, too. At Tulane, Tyjae Spears rips off 1,581 rush yards, number 5 in the country, 6.9 yards per carry his senior year. He had 6 yards per carry every other year of his career as well. So very explosive runner. Also adds 256 through the air, a quality receiver. And that's where he was really standing out. So I can see him carving out that receiving role behind Derrick Henry. Not that it's ultimately that valuable in such a low volume pass attack, but he could have some standalone benefits. He adds 21 touchdowns, though, very explosive player. What I'm trying to paint the fact is this guy is, despite being 5'9", a true featured back. He has that upside to do that. And then Wolf, Tulane, he's facing nobody in college, right? Well, his one game against the most dominant competition, USC, that was their best opponent. He goes for 4 touchdowns, 219 yards for scrimmage on 18 touches. He also dominates at the Senior Bowl, was named the MVP of that Senior Bowl, dominating NFL-worthy competition. And so far at the NFL level, preseason, 13 carries, 89 yards and 1 touchdown, rips off this 33-yard, very impressive scamper as the number 1 running back ahead of Haskins at this point. Hurdles a guy, breaks away, just one of those guys that pops as soon as you watch the tape. Like, he is better, as fast and if not faster than most of the players on the NFL level too. So yes, he's got the knees. I know he tore his ACLs and maybe doesn't even have an ACL in the knee. I don't even know what some of these reports are. That is a concern and a concern in Dynasty. I get that. But right now, this guy is a ultimate handcuff. If something happens to Henry, who is 29, who has a ton of work on him throughout his career, anyone that could buck that trend, it would be the king. It's Henry. I still like Henry in round 2, but should he miss any time, I think Tyjae Spears in one of the most run-heavy attacks would be an absolute monster. And if that missed time happens in the playoffs, they get the Texans twice in the fantasy playoffs, who were by far, 29 points per game to running backs last year, gave up, I think, 40 yards more than the next closest team on the ground. It was a dreamboat matchup for running backs last year. I don't think one defensive lineman is going to completely overhaul that. So you'd be looking at a dreamboat playoff schedule when it matters most, should Spears get a start. And either way, just a nice guy to have sitting there with some upside on your bench.
Yeah, speaking of taking Derrick Henry in the second round, I absolutely would have taken him in the second round had Mike not taken him the pick before me.
Yeah, I think
about it
in our sleeper draft.
I love where Henry goes, but I have no problem, and especially in best ball, people talk about don't handcuff. It's capping your upside. This is a situation I don't mind handcuffing because I love the value you're getting at Henry in mid to late round 2 right now. But his age does worry me, and I do think if Spears is the starter, I don't know that he'll be Henry, but I think he'd be a guy that could really rip off, 17 to 20 fantasy points per game and a great setup in that run environment they have there in Tennessee. I'm all about it. This is not a situation I avoid handcuffing by any means.
I agree. I think, but along with what you said, I think it is really just purely a handcuff situation. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, like how much of a role does he get when just his role is taking on whatever Derrick Henry doesn't take? Because Derrick Henry takes literally every single carry, and he seems to just be all right with it. So that's the only reason I'm hesitant with Spears. I mean, the talent is clearly there. He's exciting, but I just don't really know what kind of role he'll be able to have where he makes a difference on your roster unless Derrick Henry gets hurt. So that's the only reason I'm not as high on him. If he wasn't behind Derrick Henry, I think I'd be a lot higher on him. But just with him there, I just don't see much of it without an injury.
You want to talk on Zamir White a little bit, Wolf?
Yeah, I'll hit him real quick. I know the report right now is Jacobs is expected to report by week 1, but there was reportedly he commented on that, like, where did you get this? And then he deleted the comment right after. But I'm not 100% convinced we're going to get Josh Jacobs. He seems like a man of pride, and I wouldn't be stunned if he holds out. Even if he does, still a very valuable role inside that Raiders backfield. We saw McDaniels turning the keys over to a featured back it was always the Patriots are a nightmare, but last year we saw Jacobs dominate, led the NFL in touches, led the NFL in rushing carries. So I do think Zamir White, whether it's a holdout or the fact that we've seen 390 touchbacks every single year after that over the last decade, have gotten hurt or experienced a sharp decline in their production. So I imagine, that could be a big worry there with Josh Jacobs. So I think Zamir White's a great handcuff in those late rounds. And I also just like those Miami running backs at their price tags. Sure, maybe Jonathan Taylor gets traded there. That's that one bomb lingering over fantasy still. We're a week out from the season. It's still like, we can't settle everything quite yet. That could happen to this backfield. It was always going to be the Dalvin Cook bomb for a while. But assuming Taylor does not get moved there, Mostert was the running back 26 last year. Jeff Wilson was the running back 28. Both are going outside the top 45 running backs. Basically free at this point in an explosive offense, guys that are going to see meaningful work. Mostert himself, averaged over 10 points per game last year. I know that's not crazy, but we're looking at bye-week plugins and guys that are going to get meaningful volume and good offenses. You don't usually find them in the double-digit rounds here. And so I like Mostert. If I had to pick one, I kind of like Wilson even more. That shouldn't surprise longtime listeners just because David Campanelli's probably in the comments talking about my Jeff Wilson body pillow right now. You guys know I just love Jeff Wilson for whatever sick reason. He's always been my guy. But I also do think he brings a different element. So Devin Achane, he was going to be the guy that ruins this backfield and throws a big wrench. But the reason I'm back in on these guys is, one, no Dalvin Cook, maybe Jonathan Taylor, but also Devin Achane, he has not really improved impressed so far. He also got hurt. He's going to miss a couple weeks now with a shoulder injury. He's been playing behind even Myles Gaskin and Salvin Ahmed in the preseason so far. At a certain point, yes, I could see A-Chain coming in and taking some carries, but right now, and even if he does, I imagine that will come at the expense of Raheem Mostert, which is what I was going to get to. Jeff Wilson, meanwhile, brings more of that bruising element, the red zone touches. His first 2 games with the Dolphins, 16.2, 22.3, 12 points in the first half against Houston, and then he got hurt. He never really regained his footing. He had kind of like 11, 10, 9 when he finally came back, so even usable games when he did first come back. But he suffered that injury and just wasn't himself for the next couple of games. But he looked like a monster when he first got there with Miami, and I'm not convinced he can't regain that footing as a guy that scores 8 to 10 touchdowns in a really explosive offense. He's also the cheaper back as of right now, Jeff Wilson is. So he's the guy I'm drafting more often at 170 or so. Really, really like Jeff Wilson.
All right, moving on. Let's talk about Tank. Mike, what can you tell us about Tank?
So first off, I want to talk about my overall philosophy when drafting, especially running backs in this range. I'm really just looking for someone who can carve out a role within the offense and be a contributor without an injury. I briefly mentioned that a second ago, but I think Tank Bigsby can do this in Jacksonville. First off, this is projecting to be a phenomenal offense, especially with the addition of Calvin Ridley, potentially another step forward from Trevor Lawrence. This offense looks like it's set up to score a lot of points, which is someone you obviously want some fantasy players from. But first off, now I just want to get to who Tank Bigsby is as a player. First off, he's a rookie out of Auburn, 3rd-round pick that Peterson brought in to take some of the workload away from Travis Etienne. He's got a pretty big frame, NFL ready. He's a downhill runner who can also beat you with speed. I think he's all around just a really solid prospect. He was highly touted coming out of high school when he went to Auburn, and people have had their eyes on him for a while. But now that he's in the NFL, he's got his first training camp under his belt. The buzz around him is all positive. The coaching staff is saying that he's exactly what they're looking for, and he's been used in a lot of pretty important roles. And that's kind of what I want to talk about when it comes to his role within the offense. The things that Tank Bigsby has been excelling at are where Travis Etienne struggles. First, Etienne wasn't really doing much in the passing game. And while Bigsby isn't exactly known as like a specialty pass catching running back, everything that's been coming out of camp in Jacksonville has been saying that he's been exceeding and doing well with the ball in his hands, especially catching the ball. And the other thing that Etienne didn't do incredibly well last season was in short yardage situations. He had one of the worst conversion rates in goal to go in terms of punching the ball in for touchdowns. He's among one of the worst running backs in the NFL doing that. And Bigsby can do that pretty well. And we saw this early on in the preseason. In one of the drives where the starters were going for Jacksonville, Etienne had played almost every snap, but then when a 3rd and 1 comes up, they bring in Bigsby to get that short yardage going. And I think that's just a sign of what's to come at the goal line for Jacksonville this season. I don't think Etienne, or he may reprise this role as the goal line back, but I think there's a good chance he loses it to Bigsby, and that'd be detrimental for.
The duck just bristling, by the way, at home listening to this. Travis Etienne.
I think he intercepted the stream and knocked Mike out, so he couldn't finish his take there. But
he's
I think it's a great call
out there.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal call. It looks like Mike is back with us. So as he's returning, I'll just add on. It's kind of like my Tyjae Spears argument on steroids, because I do think Bigsby will have a bigger role than Spears would without an injury. It's much more a handcuff with benefits in that situation. I agree with Mike that he could definitely take over some of that goal line work where Etienne struggled, that you were just kind of painting that picture. I think that's absolutely a role he could have. And then should something happen to Etienne, another guy that could be top 7 in everybody's weekly rankings at that point. So yeah, I didn't mean to steal the thunder. I saw you dropped out, Mike, but anything else to add on Bigsby?
Yeah, I just dropped out for a second. Must be the Wi-Fi or something. But I kind of painted the whole picture there. I really think he has a role in this offense without an injury. And obviously with an injury, his 15th round price is going to pay off drastically. And I think it will without an injury to Etienne. I think this is going to be a great offense. And it might not be from day one. You might have to wait 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks with Bigsby to have a role within this offense, but I think he does even without that injury, and I think that can be a massive value to teams.
Yeah, and I will just point out with him too, I've started to see his price creeping up. He's going right now 125 or so an underdog. Last night in Yahoo, I actually drafted him as well. I got him at like 120, 130 range. So he is, after a positive preseason, 22 carries, 122 yards so far, just looking like a beast doing it too. Some really, really impressive jukes and tackle break. Looks great. He's passing the eyeball test no matter what. So his price is definitely creeping up. But even still, I scooped him up at 120 last night, and I loved it. I've been taking him at 110 sometimes in these underdog drafts. So even if it's not in this round 15 range by the time you guys are all drafting, he's still a great guy, Tanks Bigsby, to be looking at after 100.
Just about his price. Yeah, in best ball, he's going around that 120 mark. But I think in home leagues, I mean, I'm just using the Fantasy Pros composite, like Sleeper, ESPN, Yahoo for my ADP source. And in the home leagues, he's slipping into like the 150, 170 range on some formats, which is absolutely bonkers. I think that's a steal. And he was going several rounds earlier before in best ball. So I think he's a great guy to see if he slides in your draft, because just people don't know about him and grab him late.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, I already kind of spoiled this one. I threw the banner up a little bit early, but you also wanted to talk a little bit about Kareem Hunt in this context.
Yeah, obviously you can't talk as much about him because he hasn't signed anywhere yet. But I think it's just worth pointing out because of a couple of pieces of buzz that have been going around the NFL. First, Jonathan Taylor getting permission to get a trade from the Colts, and Kareem Hunt being linked to the Colts and having worked out there, I believe it was less than a week ago. So I think if he lands in Indianapolis, this could be a guy that you can get in the back end of your draft, and he could end up paying off huge if he just signs in the right spot. But until we really know where he will be playing this year, if anywhere, I mean, I'd imagine Kareem Hunt's going to have a spot on some NFL roster this season. But I think if he lands in the right spot, given his current price, he could end up being a really good pick.
Yeah, no argument here. All right, let's get really, really deep. Hail Marys. Obviously, one of these guys, the Wolf and I, are just constantly all over. We've drafted him late in best ball, time and time again. Not talking about Kyren Williams. I'm interested to hear about that one too. Obviously, we've always been all over Cordarrelle Patterson, for better or for worse. But okay, Wolf, talk to us about your Hail Mary guys.
We'll start with the guy that we're known for right now is Patterson. He's the guy we nailed out of the park 2 years ago before he broke out. We've always been on the Patterson train, and everyone's burying him now. Bijan drafted, and I get it. Bijan is a generational prospect. He is going to be the starting running back. He's probably going to see 60 to 70% of the work. I think that actually is going to help out Patterson now, though. Maybe not, because there's definitely going to be more mouths to feed. His volume's going to be going and taking a pretty steep hit, but I think he could be significantly more efficient as he moves back into, as they've said in camp, that positionalist weapon. He's been lining up at running back, receiver, tight end, moving all over the place to be creating those mismatches. I bring back a tweet from 2022 last year. In weeks 1 through 9 in 2021, Patterson was the running back 6 with 19.9. That's insane. That would have been the running back 3 points per game, and you had 459 receiving yards on 57 catches, or 57 yards per game, fresh off a 6-catch, 126-yard day. He was just that moving around, positionless masterpiece, and he was thriving, that big play threat in that role. Then they moved him to an early down grinder role. He averaged 10 points per game. That kind of was what carried over into 2022 as well. He still had some spikes last year, 22, 20.4, 18.3, 4 running back 1 weeks, 31% of the time he was on the field. He was a top 12 running back that you're getting in the last round. That was obviously a different role, and I think he'll be in an even better role, back to that one where he was killing it in 2021 in those first 9 weeks. Yes, the volume will be lower. There was no Drake London there. Who knows if Kyle Pitts will ever see volume? Who knows? But Bijan Robinson as well will definitely command targets, volume. But I do think even on just a handful of touches a week, might be more of a best ball play because it's going to be spikes and it's going to be tough to predict, or really, really deep flex leagues. But I think Patterson will still have a few 15, 20, maybe even 25-point days on his resume by the time this season ends. So he makes a nice stab. But I do think Kyren Williams could be an even steadier late round stab and more of a redraft type of guy that you could potentially rely on. He's been the clear-cut number 2 running back for the Rams all preseason. He's also been their preferred pass catching and pass blocking running back as well. So probably going to be the third down guy from day one. I think the Rams bounce back big as a whole. And so if that's the case, the third down back is going to have some real value, even if nothing happens to Cam Akers. But Cam Akers did tear his Achilles just a couple seasons ago, has more injuries on his resume as well. So it's not a guy that is bulletproof by any means. So if something happens to Akers, again, I always, you can kind of see the themes of these sleepers here. Handcuffs with benefits, guys that could bring some standalone value should you need them in a pinch, but then also if anything happens to the starter, could go bananas. How many times have we seen, whether it's Sony Michel, Darrell Henderson, number 2 running backs for the Rams, end up going crazy down the stretch when the number 1 guy goes down? So I'm just following tried and true formulas. He's getting praise, Kyren Williams from McVay, from Stafford. Everybody seems to love him here. He hasn't played in a single preseason game, which kind of hints at how much the team values him at this point too. So I really, really like Kyren Williams, who's going undrafted right now. He's become my de facto last round pick in best ball if I need a running back. Big fan of Kyren.
All right, moving on to Mike's undrafted sleeper guys. Jerome Ford, educate us.
So this is another guy that is the discrepancy in ADP between best ball and home leagues is pretty massive. I think you'll be able to get him with your last pick in just about any home league, but he was going somewhere around pick 200, maybe a little bit before that in best ball. But I think he's worth a stab in the last round. His price has fallen recently because of a hamstring injury that's kept him off the field. Kevin Stefanski provided an update just a couple of days ago. They don't really have a timetable for him, but they're hoping he can be back for the regular season premiere. But other than that, I mean, it doesn't really matter that much in my opinion, just because this is literally like a guy you could just stab at in your last round and cut him if he doesn't play. But like I said, going undrafted in most leagues. But prior to his injury, all of the headlines surrounding him, all of the reports were saying that he was going to play that complementary role to Nick Chubb and take on whatever work Nick Chubb didn't, whether that be through the air or on the ground. He was going to be the guy who was backing him up. There wasn't really much other competition in that running back room. And I just think that this second running back spot behind Nick Chubb is incredibly valuable. I mean, we saw Kareem Hunt provide several. I'm not saying he's going to be Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt's obviously a lot more talented, but we saw Kareem Hunt and numerous other running backs provide meaningful weeks in fantasy behind Nick Chubb, or even when Nick Chubb got hurt. I mean, that role becomes incredibly valuable. And just like outside of the role in Cleveland, I think that Jerome Ford can be a pretty good player just in general. He wowed at Cincinnati. He showed some pretty impressive explosive plays, blowing by defenders on screen passes. He played with Desmond Ridder there. He was a pretty key contributor to their run at the college football playoff. He has a solid resume, and he's done some things on the field that I think can translate to the NFL. And I just think he's a great stab, especially being in Cleveland, where they've shown that these running backs can be incredibly valuable. I mean, why not just take a chance on this guy in the last round of your drafts? And if Nick Chubb goes down, he is automatically vaulted into one of the best and most important roles in all of fantasy football, that Cleveland RB1.
Yeah. We saw it with Dearness Johnson even just 2 years ago. Like, it doesn't have to be an impressive back. It's a great scheme. No. I'm 100% there. Ford tore up the preseason last week. He was going as early as pick 150 or so just about a month ago in those early drafts, given he was slated for that Kareem Hunt role. It's part of the reason their coaching staff said they're ready to get rid of, they didn't need to sign anybody else. They didn't feel the need to bring back Hunt. They felt so good about Ford and his progression. So one little hamstring injury that he's expected to be back from week 1 anyways, that's going to make him free in drafts. I love this pick too. I have a ton of Jerome Ford so far this year. I'm with you, Mike.
It is a good pick. Let's move on to wide receivers. Got a lot of them. I will say, Mike, we said we'd be done in about an hour, and we're 55 minutes in.
Here we are.
Right.
Here we are. Famous last words, as we said, as projected by the truth.
When it comes to the running time of these, always bet the over.
What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.